Welcome to part 2, chapter 16. We've been going over plants. We covered 4 types of plants in this chapter, and we're going to go in detail for those today. So we started here with the land plants. Sorry, not the land plants, the green algae. The green algae then started adapting into land plants. First adaptation was cuticle and stomata. Stomata, if you guys remember, allows for gas exchange. So it allows for gas exchange. That's how they get the carbon dioxide and they release oxygen through stomata. It's an opening. Hopefully you guys remember that. And the plants that got the adaptation were bryophytes. Bryophytes include mosses, hornworts, and liverworts. I'm going to show you pictures of these, and you will have to identify these on the exam. Then another adaptation happened. That was the vascular tissue, xylem and phloem. Then we have a seedless vascular plants. This is mostly fern plants. This doesn't have vascular tissue, so they don't grow very tall in size. Fern plants, because they have vascular tissue, now they can grow tall. It's like a plumbing system inside, and the water can go up, and it helps them compete better for the sunlight as well. Then another adaptation happened, pollen and seeds. So there were still spores. These plants were making spores. These plants were making spores. Now plants started making pollen and seed. Because they make pollen, they rely on the wind for reproduction. That's gymnosperms. Gymnosperms are mostly cone plants. You guys know them as cone plants. And then another adaptation, reproductive adaptation, was fruits and flowers. Fruits and flowers entice animals and insects. So in addition to the wind, now these plants could use insects and animals for reproduction and dispersing the seeds. So that group is angiosperms. So we've been covering these 4 groups. Another thing that we covered was the alternation of generations. We covered the generalized life cycle of the plants. All plants share this generalized plant life cycle. Today, what we're going to do, we're going to tweak it a little bit. So you guys have to know alternation of generations for bryophytes, for seedless vascular plants, and that's it. I'm not going to have you memorize this for gymnosperms and angiosperms. There are a few things I want you guys to know about gymnosperms and angiosperms, but I'm going to point that out as we go along. So for this generalized plant cycle, I'm just going to give you an overview. You have a zygote that's diploid, 2N. It starts to divide through mitosis. It divides and turns into a sporophyte. Sporophyte is a plant stage that makes spores. Spores are like seeds. These sporophyte go through meiosis, turn into spores that are haploid. These spores drop on the ground. Depending on if it's a seedless vascular plant, this is how it's going to germinate. If it's a bryophyte, this is how it's going to germinate, turn into a gametophyte. Gametophyte is something that's going to make gametes. Gametes are sex cells, egg and sperm. Then you have your haploid gametes through mitosis. And then once these fuse together, fertilization happens and you have the zygote. So the whole thing repeats. Your book is color coding it. Diploid is green. So this is diploid. And then haploid is brownish. That's haploid. Another thing I want you to remember, I can ask you, I remember making 7 to 8 questions on the exam about this. So I can ask you, if gametes are diploid or haploid, same thing for zygote or sporophyte or gametophyte. I can also ask you if there's mitosis here or meiosis here. If you're trying to remember this, just remember that meiosis only happens once, and that happens from sporophyte to spores. Everywhere else is mitosis. So try to memorize this cycle. Take a blank sheet of paper and start drawing it. So that's the overview. So let's move on to bryophytes. So bryophytes, I already said they're non-vascular. They're tiny. There's no tubes inside their bodies that can take water up. So they're really tiny. They don't have vascular tissue. In the lab, we have this moss container. So I would have given you that. You would have looked at it, but because we can't do that anymore, maybe if you go outside, you might be able to find some of these. Maybe next time you go on a hike, you can identify these. So because there's no vascular tissue, water moves from cell to cell through diffusion and osmosis. So think of your kitchen sponge. If you drop water on one corner and then then you just have to wait for the water to diffuse through the whole sponge, it's gonna take forever. So that's why they don't grow very tall. They're very small, and it takes forever for the water to go through. And that's why they're found in the shade, near water streams, near a waterfall or river. So they're found in moist environments. So that's bryophytes. These are the three that I want you guys to remember. This is a moss, sphagnum moss. This structure up here is the sporophyte. That's the sporophyte. This is where it makes spores. This is hornwort, looks like horns. And then this is liverwort, looks like palm trees. It makes these when it wants to reproduce. So be able to identify these. Also, it'd be nice, maybe, next time you're gonna hike, you can maybe identify some of these and you can impress your family members or whoever you're going to hike with. So try to remember these three for bryophytes. So this is a generalized cycle. I just gave you overview of this. So what we are going to do now, we're going to tweak it. We're going to tweak it, and then we're going to substitute sporophyte for bryophytes here. So we're gonna start inserting pictures now. So here you have a zygote that's diploid. It's dividing through mitosis, and that's gonna give you sporophyte. This whole thing is not sporophyte. Only this part is sporophyte. Only this part is sporophyte. This sporophyte has a capsule on the top. So it has this stalk, and there's this capsule on top. So in this capsule is where the spores are. So there's lots of meiosis happening inside here, and it makes the spores that are haploid. So this capsule releases the spores. These spores, they drop on the ground and they start growing, maybe when the conditions are right, maybe it rained or something. Then it goes through mitosis and turns into a young gametophyte. This young gametophyte is green, it has leaves, it has roots. So it goes through mitosis and then it does photosynthesis and it starts to grow. When it starts to grow, it turns into a mature gametophyte. These are mature gametophyte. For bryophytes, there is separate male and female. It's gonna be different when we go on the next life cycle for ferns, but for bryophytes, it's separated. Male and female are separate. It's two different plants. One plant can be male, other plant can be female. The male plant is going to make the spores here, and the female plant is going to have the egg cells. So male plants have the sperm cells here, and then egg cells are made in the female plant. So these are your gametes, sperms and egg. Then it rains. When there's some water nearby, this sperm is going to swim to the egg, and it's going to fertilize the egg. Once the egg gets fertilized, you have a zygote. So again, gametophytes produce gametes through mitosis. Gametes travel from male to female. So the sperm travels to female egg with the use of water. These droplets are showing water. And then when the sperm meets the egg, a zygote forms through fertilization. And then zygote goes through mitosis, divides, turns into sporophyte. So the whole cycle reruns again. This green part here, earlier I said this is not part of the sporophyte. That's because this is gametophyte. This is gametophyte. This green stuff is gametophyte. It's not sporophyte. Only this top part is sporophyte. I'm gonna see if there are any questions. Any questions, guys?
Nope.
Nothing, okay. Okay, so one thing I want you guys to memorize about this life cycle, actually about all of them, is which stage is dominant and which stage is non-dominant. When I say dominant, I'm not talking about those dominant and recessive genes. I'm talking about which one you see more. So for this life cycle for bryophytes, dominant stage is gametophyte stage. Because if you were to go for a hike and there were some bryophytes nearby, you're only gonna see this green stuff. You're not gonna really see much of this. So this is non-dominant stage, sporophyte, and dominant stage is gametophyte. So let me write that down for you. This is what you see more, gametophyte, when you go out in the nature. Let me show you an example of that too. So here, if you go outside, you mostly see this green stuff. You rarely, these are not very noticeable. And this only happens when it's reproducing. So it's not very noticeable. You mostly see this green stuff. Even here, see the green stuff. There's maybe one sporophyte. So that's the dominant stage. So just to give you guys a review of this life cycle, so I need you guys to memorize this. I'm gonna try to do a drawing for this. I know I did a generalized drawing, but I'm gonna try to do one more drawing for this. So we have a zygote, that's 2N. Now, maybe help me out. What does it go through, mitosis or meiosis?
Mitosis.
And then, let's see, it's gonna turn into a sporophyte. So you have this green stuff. So you have this green stuff, and then there is sporophyte that starts to grow. So maybe this, a stalk, and then on top there is a capsule. So that looks pretty bad. There is a capsule on top. So only this part is the sporophyte. Inside this capsule, you have the spores. So inside this capsule, you have the spores and there's meiosis happening. So it goes through meiosis and releases those spores. Those spores are haploid. This was diploid because it came from the diploid zygote. These spores, they drop on the ground and they start growing. They go through mitosis and they start to grow. And when they're growing, it's gonna have some leaves, maybe a little more, and some roots. And we're gonna call this young gametophyte. That's the extra stage we're adding, so we're tweaking this. So this is called young gametophyte. This young gametophyte is 1N, and it does lots of photosynthesis. So it does photosynthesis. It does photosynthesis and it turns into a mature gametophyte. So I'm gonna try to draw a mature gametophyte here. If this is male, it's gonna make sperm, and if it's female, it's gonna make egg. So I'm gonna say egg here, and then sperm here. So maybe sperm, and then egg. So when it rains, when there's water nearby, is going to swim, the sperm is going to swim to the egg. So maybe there's rain, there's water, and this is going to cause the sperm to swim to the egg. So the sperm is going to go to the egg. So now say this is the egg, and then they fuse together, and that's fertilization.
Professor, quick
Yes.
question. Can it happen both ways? Can the egg swim to meet the sperm, or is it that the egg is always stagnant? Then it will be the sperm that will meet the egg.
No, the sperm has a tail for swimming. The egg can't swim. So the
Oh,
sperm swims.
the flagella, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Okay, so that's your overview. Any questions? I wanted to draw this because sometimes, you know, when you're studying, you miss the little steps like water is needed for fertilization. It turns into a young gametophyte first, and you just straight go to these stages. So that's why I wanted to kind of draw that for you. Does this make sense to everybody? Give me thumbs up or tell me in the chat if it makes sense. Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so here's the overview. So we said this part is the sporophyte. Another thing I forgot to mention, this capsule is called sporangium. So let me label that. This capsule is called sporangium because it makes spores. Sporangium. So here we have the sporangium. It's the top part. This is gametophyte. This is not sporophyte. So let me actually label that here too. And the sporangium releases the spores, and the spores drop on the ground and go through mitosis and start growing into young gametophyte. It has the leaves and the roots. It does photosynthesis. If it's, it can either turn into male gametophyte or female gametophyte. Male gametophyte is going to have the sperm, gametes, and then the female gametophyte is going to produce the egg. With water, the sperm can swim to the egg. They fuse together, fertilization happens, now you have a zygote. When it starts to grow, it grows around here because that's where the egg is. So that's why you still have this gametophyte left. This is a picture, and that's why I said this stage is dominant. You see mostly green stuff. So the stage is dominant. Next, we have the seedless vascular plants. Now they have vascular tissue, which can transport water to higher heights, and it can help them grow taller. If they're tall, they can get more sunlight. Maybe they're taller than their neighboring plants. And that's better for growth. So the vascular tissue I need you guys to know is phloem and xylem. Phloem transports sugars. Leaves do photosynthesis. Do you guys remember which structure in the leaves does the photosynthesis?
Chloroplast.
Chloroplast. So photosynthesis happens in chloroplast. The leaves make the sugars, and then the sugars are sent down, so phloem goes down. Roots get the water, and xylem transports water upward, so it goes up. And then we have one more tissue that's called lignin. This is also a type of sugar that's found in the woody part of the plant to help them grow tall. So the redwood trees, they can grow really tall because they have this extra support, and they need this because of gravity. So those are the three kinds I need you guys to know: phloem, xylem, and lignin. Also, one more that we talked about in the lab is cellulose. Cellulose is found in plant cells. Lignin is found in the woody part. So that was a modification here. The vascular plants had the vascular tissue. So now they had the tubes inside, they could grow tall. So we are going to substitute these images for the gametophyte and for the sporophyte for the seedless vascular plant life cycle. That's another one that you guys have to know. So this is Generalized, when we cover the generalized one, we use this as example. And now we're going to start substituting. Before we do that, let me give you a question.